A winter night in the North Atlantic in 1941, a British destroyer is closing in on a German submarine. The sonar operator has contact. 300 yards, 200 yards, the signal is getting weaker. 150 yards, and then silence. The ship has passed directly over the target, and at that exact moment, the sonar has gone completely blind. The captain is guessing now. Heavy barrels of explosive roll off the stern and plunge into the black water behind the ship. Massive fountains erupt in the darkness. The crew holds its breath. Nothing. The submarine is gone. This happened thousands of times during the war. Out of every 100 depth charge attacks, fewer than 2 ever managed to send a submarine to the bottom. Britain was losing the one battle that truly frightened Winston Churchill. The battle for the Atlantic convoys that kept the island alive, and one eccentric lieutenant colonel with a monocle who tested experimental bombs by firing them across his own driveway while visitors dove into the hedgerows. He knew how to fix this problem. He had known for years. The Royal Navy laughed at his weapon. The Ordnance Board rejected his idea 3 times in 30 years. And by the time anyone finally listened, thousands of merchant sailors had already perished in the freezing Atlantic. Losses that did not have to happen. This is the story of Stewart Blacker, the Hedgehog, and the simplest idea of the entire war, an idea that nearly drowned in bureaucracy before it could save a single life. But to understand why that weapon mattered so much, you first need to understand what Britain was about to lose. Great Britain is an island, and in 1939 that island could not feed itself. 70% of all food arrived by ship, 91% of butter, 80% of fruit, 70% of grain, sugar and cheese. The country needed more than 1 million tons of imported cargo every single week just to survive and keep fighting. When the U-boats began tearing apart the convoys, food imports dropped by half, from 22 million tons a year down to 11.5 million. Rationing started in January 1940. Bacon, butter, and sugar first. By the middle of 1942, almost everything was rationed, except vegetables, fish, and bread. A typical weekly allowance for one person looked like this: 1 egg, 2 ounces of tea, 4 ounces of bacon, 1 ounce of cheese, and 8 ounces of sugar. That was it. And rationing did not end with the war. It lasted until 1954, 9 years after victory. Churchill himself coined the phrase Battle of the Atlantic on the 6th of March, 1941. He chose those words deliberately, echoing Battle of Britain, because he needed the country to grasp the scale of what was happening at sea. By the end of the war, the numbers were staggering. Around 3,500 ships lay on the Atlantic floor. More than 36,000 merchant sailors had perished, 1 out of every 4 men who had served in the pre-war merchant navy. That was a higher casualty rate than any branch of the British Armed Forces. Churchill later wrote that the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the entire war was the U-boat threat. It did not come in the form of battles and glittering achievements. It came through statistics, diagrams, and curves, unknown to the nation and incomprehensible to the public. The men who were doing all this damage had a name for what was happening. They called it Die Glückliche, Zeit, the happy time. In June 1940, France fell, and for Admiral Karl Dönitz, the commander of Germany's submarine fleet, this was the greatest gift of the war. Suddenly he had Atlantic bases in Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire. His U-boats no longer wasted a week sailing through the North Sea just to reach the hunting grounds. They could slip straight into the Atlantic within hours, and the slaughter began. In just 4 months, from July to October 1940, U-boats sent 282 ships to the bottom. 1.5 million tons of cargo gone. Three aces dominated the ocean. Otto Kretschmer, known as Silent Otto, claimed 47 ships, over 274,000 tons, the highest score of any submarine commander in the entire war. Gwenther Prien, the Bull of Scapa Flow, was the man who had slipped into the Royal Navy's main anchorage and sunk the battleship Royal Oak, taking 833 sailors with her. Joachim Schepke claimed 37 ships. All three were lost within 2 weeks of each other in March 1941. But the worst was still ahead. The second happy time began in January 1942. Operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat. Over the next 8 months, U-boats destroyed 609 ships, 3.1 million tons, a quarter of all Allied shipping losses for the entire war, and it cost the Germans just 22 submarines. The American coastline was completely unprotected. Admiral Ernest King stubbornly refused to organize convoys. Coastal cities would not enforce blackouts. Reinhard Hardegen, commanding U-123, wrote in his log that he could hear music drifting from the Jacksonville Pier while he was sinking ships in the roadstead. The first organized coastal convoy in American waters did not sail until the 14th of May, 1942. The Wolfpack tactic, Rudeltaktik, ran on radio. Dönitz spread his boats in long patrol lines across the convoy routes. The first U-boat to spot a convoy would shadow it and transmit coordinates back to headquarters. Dönitz would then direct the rest of the pack to converge. The attacks came at night on the surface from multiple directions at once. A surfaced U-boat could make 17 knots, faster than most escort vessels, and was nearly invisible in the dark. The price Germany paid for this campaign was equally staggering. Out of roughly 40,900 men who served in U-boats, between 28 and 30,000 perished, 75%, the highest casualty rate of any military branch on either side of the war. The average age of a U-boat crewman was 22. Out of 1,156 U-boats constructed, 783 were lost. 1 in every 3 submarines was destroyed on its very first patrol. So why could the Royal Navy not stop them? The answer comes down to a fatal flaw that nobody wanted to admit. The primary weapon against submarines simply did not work. A depth charge was a steel barrel packed with explosives and fitted with a hydrostatic fuse that detonated at a preset depth. The standard British Mark 7 weighed about 420 pounds, with roughly 290 pounds of that being explosive. Ships would roll them off the stern or launch them sideways, using mortars to create a diamond-shaped pattern in the water. To crack the pressure hull of a submarine, the charge had to go off within 20 feet, to cause serious damage within 30 feet. Beyond 60 feet, the explosion was nothing more than noise. But the real problem was not the weapon itself. It was ASDIC, the British sonar system. ASDIC sent a directed beam of sound through the water and listened for the echo. It gave bearing and range, but it was very poor at measuring depth. And here was the critical defect. As a destroyer closed in on a submarine, the target would pass beneath the sonar beam. At roughly 200 to 300 yards, contact was lost completely. At the very moment the ship was closest to its prey, it went blind. What followed was a desperate guess. The destroyer would sprint forward over the submarine's last known position and dump its charges off the stern. The Mark 7 sank at about 7 feet per second to reach a depth of 200 feet, roughly 30 seconds. The total blind time from losing sonar contact to the moment of detonation, more than a minute. And in that minute, a submarine moving at 5 or 6 knots could travel 150 to 250 yards, far outside the blast radius. German commanders learned this routine by heart. They would listen for the sound of the destroyer's propellers accelerating. That meant the ship was beginning its attack run, and they would make a sharp turn. After the depth charges exploded, the underwater turbulence would blind the sonar for another 15 minutes. The submarine could change position by a full mile before anyone could find her again. The numbers tell the whole story. British warships carried out 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war. Those attacks resulted in 85.5 confirmed submarine losses. That is a success rate of less than 2%. And to put one final number on just how survivable these attacks were, U-427 endured 678 depth charges in a single hunt in April 1945. 678 explosions. She survived them all. The man who had the answer to this problem was not an admiral, not a professor, and not an engineer from any government laboratory. His name was Latham Valentine Stewart Blacker, and his life reads like someone crossed a James Bond character with a Victorian explorer, and then gave him a workshop full of explosives. He was born on the 1st of October, 1887, in Grappenhall, Cheshire. His father was a major in the Royal Artillery, a veteran of the Afghan War of 1878. His mother was the daughter of a major general. Military service ran through the family like a bloodline going back generations. Cheltenham College, Bedford School, then the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, commissioned in 1907. He served on the northwest frontier with several distinguished regiments, fought in Afghanistan, and was mentioned in dispatches. In 1911, he earned Royal Aero Club certificate number 121, making him one of the very first military pilots in British history. When the Great War broke out, Blacker was halfway through an expedition across the Himalayas into China. He joined the Royal Flying Corps, and over the next 3 years he was shot down and wounded 3 times, in 1915, 1916, and 1917. He fought as infantry at Neuve-Chapelle. According to his family's biography, it was Blacker's group that developed one of the key aviation inventions of the First World War, a synchronization gear that allowed a machine gun to fire through the spinning propeller. After the armistice, his war did not end. He went on a secret mission with Colonel Bailey to Tashkent, fought the Bolsheviks in Transcaspia, and published a book about it in 1922 called On Secret Patrol in High Asia. He received the Order of the British Empire in 1921 for his service in Persia. In 1933, he helped organize and served as chief observer on the Houston Mount Everest expedition, the first flight over the summit of Everest in history. He married Lady Doris Peel, the daughter of the first Earl Peel, a former Secretary of State. They had twin sons and 3 daughters. One reviewer of his biography later described him as a cross between Q from the Bond films and Biggles, the monocled veteran and self-appointed freelance inventor of experimental weapons. From the early 1930s, Blacker became obsessed with a single idea: the Spigot mortar. It was a weapon with no barrel, just a fixed steel rod onto which a bomb fitted with its own propellant charge was placed. When fired, the charge launched the bomb off the rod. It was simple, cheap, and powerful. He patented the principle in 1930 and offered the army a light infantry mortar he called the Arbalest. They rejected it in favor of a Spanish design. He then designed a heavier anti-tank version, the Blacker Bombard, and spent 2 years trying to get the War Office interested. Nobody wanted it. So Blacker funded the work himself. He hired his own staff, set up private workshops at his estate in Coates, West Sussex, and began testing weapons on his own property. The firing range ran directly across his driveway. According to his family, unsuspecting visitors were sometimes seen frantically pedaling their bicycles up the drive, trying to get through before the next round was fired. When his son David brought his future wife home to meet the family, she was nearly taken out by a prototype being demonstrated to 4 Israeli colonels on the front lawn. The projectile curved gracefully back toward the spectators, and everyone dove headfirst into the flower bed. David's mother-in-law later recalled that she regularly threw herself flat during tennis matches. The target was positioned just behind a tree at the edge of the court. When Winston Churchill visited Coates to observe a weapons demonstration, Blacker's twin sons, about 12 or 13 at the time, stole gunpowder and cordite from their father's workshop and built a volcano in the sandpit. The eruption showered the Prime Minister and his entourage with sand and debris. Churchill, by all accounts, was delighted and declared it a most satisfactory result. Years later, after Blacker had passed away, a bomb disposal team was called to clear his basement workshop at Coldhaze. They found what they described as an enormous quantity of explosive material. Experimental projectiles of every caliber, from fractions of an inch to several inches, fitted with fins, propellers, and all manner of devices. The officer in charge said the basement resembled what the cellars of Parliament must have looked like at the time of the gunpowder plot. Blacker had invented the principle, but getting from a spigot mortar in a country garden to a weapon bolted to the deck of a warship, that journey ran through 2 of the most unusual organizations in British military history. The first was MD1, officially known as Military Intelligence Research, but better known by its nickname, Churchill's Toyshop. It was run by Major Millis Jeffreys, a Royal Engineers officer and explosives specialist. Jeffreys took Blacker's spigot mortar concept and turned it into production weapons. First the Bombard for the Home Guard, then the PIAT, a man-portable anti-tank launcher that saw action from Normandy to the end of the war. But the weapon that concerns us most came from a different department entirely. The DMWD, the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. Its staff called it the Wheezers and Dodgers. It was established in 1941 under the Admiralty, and everything about it was eccentric. Its headquarters was a requisitioned Victorian pleasure pier in the seaside town of Weston-super-Mare. Weapons testing took place at the neighbouring Breen Down Fort. Among its personnel were the novelist Neville Shute, serving as Lieutenant Commander NS Norway, and the motor racing photographer Louis Clementaski. The driving force behind the Hedgehog was Commander Charles Frederick Goodeve, a Canadian chemist from Neepawa, Manitoba, who had already made his reputation by inventing the degaussing system that protected ships against magnetic mines. Within the Admiralty, the phrase "to do a good eve" meant to get something done by whatever means necessary, regardless of how many committees stood in the way. And there were plenty of committees standing in the way. One senior official at the Ordnance Board told Goodeve directly. This idea was proposed by a Major X in 1910, and it was turned down. Colonel Blacker proposed the spigot mortar in 1930, and it was turned down again. Major Jeffreys proposed it in 1939, and it was turned down for the 3rd time. If God Almighty himself sponsored the spigot mortar, it would still be turned down by the Ordnance Board. Goodeve did not stop. Goodeve's idea was so simple that the Admiralty almost could not take it seriously. Instead of dropping 1 bomb behind the ship, fire 24 bombs ahead of the ship, while the sonar still has contact. Spread them in a pattern that covers the area where the submarine is hiding. The concept eliminated the blind spot entirely. 24 spigot-launched projectiles mounted on 4 cradles of 6. Each round was about 7 inches in diameter, just under 4 feet long, and weighed 65 pounds. The warhead carried 35 pounds of Torpex, a mixture of RDX, TNT, and aluminium powder that was significantly more powerful than standard explosives. When fired, the 24 bombs arced forward and landed in an elliptical pattern, roughly 140 by 120 feet across, at a distance of 200 yards ahead of the ship. The spacing between each impact was about 15 feet, narrower than the width of a U-boat hull. They sank through the water at 23 feet per second, 3 times faster than early depth charges. But the true genius was the fuse. It was a contact fuse, armed by a small propeller that spun as the bomb entered the water. It detonated only when it struck something solid. A hit meant an explosion. A miss meant silence. Nothing. And that silence was one of the weapon's greatest advantages, because it meant the sonar was never disrupted. The crew could immediately begin another attack run without waiting 15 minutes for the water to settle. A single Hedgehog strike punched a hole 3 to 4 inches wide in the pressure hull. At a depth of 250 to 300 feet, seawater would pour through that hole at roughly 400 gallons per minute. No submarine ever survived a direct Hedgehog hit, not one. Goodave personally designed the flat-nosed shape of the projectile so it would enter the water cleanly instead of ricocheting off the surface. He calculated the optimal impact pattern using a device resembling a roulette wheel with a scale model of a submarine. He even estimated the height of a U-boat's deck from an Italian magazine photograph of a man standing on a submarine. The first batch of projectiles was manufactured by Boozy and Hawkes, a company that normally made musical instruments. The name came from a competition among the staff. The empty spigot rods sticking up from the launcher frame looked like the spines of a hedgehog. Reload time was 3 minutes. 4 decisive advantages over the depth charge. First, the weapon fired while the sonar still held contact, so the blind spot simply ceased to exist. Second, a miss produced no explosion, which meant the sonar stayed clear and the ship could attack again immediately. Third, the faster sinking speed gave the submarine far less time to maneuver. Fourth, there was no need to guess the depth, because the contact fuse worked at any depth. On paper, the Hedgehog should have changed everything overnight. In reality, it nearly failed before it ever proved itself. Blacker had offered the Spigot mortar to the Admiralty before the war even started. The response was 4 words: no naval requirement exists. The Admiralty was confident that ASDIC had solved the submarine problem. There had also been an earlier attempt at a forward-throwing weapon, the Fairley mortar, and it had been a disaster. That failure made the establishment even more skeptical of anything that claimed to do the same job. When Goodeve and the Wheezers and Dodgers pushed the Hedgehog forward, they hit a wall of institutional resistance. The Ordnance Board had rejected the Spigot principle 3 times in 30 years. The breakthrough came through Churchill personally. The Prime Minister already knew Jeffries and MD1. He had already watched demonstrations at Blacker's estate in Coates, and he understood the potential. After a successful demonstration of the Hedgehog, Churchill authorized production himself. A prototype was fitted to HMS Westcott and tested in May 1941. The weapon entered operational service in early 1942, and then nothing happened. By November 1942, roughly 100 ships were carrying the Hedgehog. Not a single one had managed to confirm a submarine sinking with it. The problems were partly technical. In the heavy swells of the North Atlantic, waves would wash over the launcher and short out the firing circuits. Salvos would go off incomplete, with bombs landing in a scattered pattern instead of the tight ellipse they were designed for. But the deeper problem was psychological. When a depth charge missed, it still produced a spectacular explosion, a towering column of water, a deep thundering boom that shook the ship. The crew felt they had done something. When a Hedgehog salvo missed, there was nothing, just silence. 24 splashes, and then quiet. It was deeply discouraging. Crews drifted back to depth charges, not because they worked better, but because they at least made noise. The Admiralty eventually issued a formal directive ordering captains to report why they had chosen not to use the Hedgehog when they had sonar contact with a submarine. The DMWD sent an officer to the escort base at Londonderry to train crews directly, walking them through examples of successful attacks, rebuilding confidence in the weapon, one ship at a time. Slowly, it worked. The success rate began to climb, and when it did climb, the results were unlike anything the war had seen. The most extraordinary combat record of the Hedgehog belongs to a ship that had no business becoming legendary. USS England was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, 1,400 tons, a small and unglamorous warship designed for convoy protection. She was commissioned on the 10th of December, 1943, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton. The ship was named after Ensign John C. England, who had been lost aboard the battleship USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor. Her anti-submarine armament included one Mark 10 Hedgehog launcher and a standard set of depth charges. In May 1944, American codebreakers at FRUPAC intercepted a Japanese radio message about a submarine, I-16, delivering rice to the garrison on Bougainville. A hunter group was dispatched to the Solomon Islands area, and England was part of it. On the 19th of May, England made sonar contact. The first Hedgehog salvo missed, the second missed, the third and fourth, nothing. On the fifth attack, 4 to 6 bombs found their target. The underwater explosion was so massive that it lifted England's stern clear out of the water and knocked crewmen off their feet. An oil slick spread across the surface, 3 miles long and 6 miles wide. I-16 was gone. 3 days later, the 22nd of May, American intelligence had identified a line of 7 Japanese submarines forming a patrol screen. USS George made the first attack with her Hedgehog and missed. England moved in. Her second salvo produced at least 3 detonations, followed by a large underwater explosion. RO-106 was gone. The next day, the 23rd of May, RO-104. USS George attacked 4 times and missed everyone. England fired her second salvo, 10 to 12 detonations. The sonar operator reported breaking up noises, and 3 minutes later a massive explosion echoed through the water. The 24th of May, RO-116. England needed just 1 salvo, 3 to 5 hits. Breaking up noises confirmed on sonar. The most efficient attack of the entire campaign. On the 26th of May, England was heading to Manus Island for resupply when she was ordered to turn around. USS Raby had detected another submarine, RO-108. England arrived and fired 1 salvo, 4 to 6 hits, her 5th submarine in 8 days. And then came the 31st of May, and the most dramatic engagement of them all. RO-105 was commanded by a captain who knew exactly what he was doing. For 25 hours he played a cat-and-mouse game with the American hunter group, surviving more than 20 Hedgehog attacks from multiple ships. At one point he surfaced directly between 2 American destroyer escorts, so close that neither ship could fire without hitting the other. The division commander had been deliberately holding England back. He wanted the other ships to share in the success. Every single one of them failed. When intelligence reported Japanese aircraft approaching the area, the commander finally gave up trying. His radio message has become one of the most quoted lines in American naval history. "Oh hell! Go ahead, England!" England fired 1 salvo, 6 to 10 detonations. RO-105 was gone. 6 submarines in 12 days. No warship in any navy in any war has ever matched that record. Admiral Ernest King, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, sent a message that was read to the entire crew. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. The destruction of that Japanese patrol line had consequences far beyond the 6 submarines themselves. Admiral Toyota, commander of the Japanese combined fleet, lost his scouting screen and made a critical miscalculation. He expected the American offensive to strike Palau. Instead, the United States invaded the Mariana Islands. But the Hedgehog did not win the Battle of the Atlantic on its own. No single weapon did. Victory came from a convergence of systems, each one filling a gap that the others could not cover. And the Hedgehog was one critical piece of that puzzle. Centimetric radar was arguably the most transformative. In 1940, physicists at the University of Birmingham developed the cavity magnetron, a device that could generate radar signals on a 10-centimeter wavelength. This was revolutionary because the German Metox radar warning receiver, which U-boat crews relied on to detect approaching aircraft, simply could not pick up the new frequency. From early 1941 on ships, and from March 1943 on aircraft, centimetric radar began stripping away the one advantage that had made U-boats so dangerous: their ability to operate on the surface at night, invisible and fast. Dönitz later admitted that radar, especially when carried by long-range patrol aircraft, was what ultimately robbed the U-boat of its ability to fight on the surface. Then there was HF/DF, high-frequency direction finding, known universally as huff-duff. The wolf-pack tactic depended entirely on radio communication. Every time a U-boat spotted a convoy and transmitted its position back to headquarters, it gave itself away. Shipborne direction-finding equipment, developed in part by the Polish engineer Wacław Strusinski, could triangulate the bearing of a transmitting submarine within minutes. The Germans were convinced that direction finding from a moving ship was technically impossible, so they continued to transmit freely. They were wrong. Huff-duff contributed to roughly 24% of all U-boat losses during the war. Ultra, the intelligence derived from breaking the German Enigma cipher at Bletchley Park, had an even more dramatic effect. When British code breakers could read the U-boat communications, the Operational Intelligence Centre in London would reroute convoys around the Wolfpack patrol lines before they were ever spotted. The correlation was stark. When Ultra was available, monthly shipping losses dropped by half. When it was not available, they surged. In February 1942, the German Navy introduced the 4-rotor M4 Enigma machine, and Bletchley Park went blind for nearly 10 months. Losses quadrupled. The breakthrough came from material captured aboard U-559 in October 1942. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier swam into the sinking submarine and retrieved the critical code books. Knowing the boat was going down, both men went down with her. Both received the George Cross posthumously. Their sacrifice allowed Bletchley to resume decryption in December 1942. Long-range air power closed the final gap. For most of the war, there was a stretch of the mid-Atlantic, roughly 1,000 miles wide, that no land-based aircraft could reach. The U-boats knew this, and they concentrated their attacks there. The solution was the B-24 Liberator, the only Allied bomber with the range to cover that gap. On the 18th of March, 1943, President Roosevelt personally ordered 60 Liberators transferred from the Pacific to the Atlantic, one of only 2 direct orders he gave to the military during the entire war. Escort carriers added mobile air cover, and the Lee Light, a 22 million candle power searchlight designed by Wing Commander Humphrey de Lee entirely on his own initiative, allowed aircraft to catch U-boats on the surface at night in the final seconds before an attack. All of this came together in May 1943. For the Germans, it became known as Black May. In a single month, 43 U-boats were destroyed, a quarter of the entire operational fleet. More submarines were lost in those 31 days than in the whole of 1941. Convoy SC-130 crossed the Atlantic without losing a single merchant ship, while 5 U-boats that attacked it were sent to the bottom, including one that carried Dönitz's own son, Peter. On the 24th of May, Dönitz ordered a general withdrawal of all U-boats from the North Atlantic. The tide had turned, and it would never turn back. Historians later gave most of the credit to Ultra and Radar, partly because the declassification of Ultra in 1974 triggered a wave of books and scholarship, and partly because intelligence and radar were strategic technologies that shaped the entire campaign. The Hedgehog, by contrast, was a tactical weapon. It decided individual engagements, not grand strategy. But the numbers do not lie. British depth charges achieved a success rate of less than 2%. The Hedgehog achieved 17.5%, 10 times more effective per attack. By the final year of the war, Hedgehog success rates had climbed above 35%. 11 of the last 16 U-boat losses inflicted by American destroyers and destroyer escorts came from Hedgehog attacks. And the weapon's direct descendant of the Squid went even further. Squid was also developed by the Wheezers and Dodgers. It used 3 barrels to launch full-size depth charges in a triangular pattern at 275 yards. Its depth settings were automatically updated by a Type 147 sonar right up to the moment of firing. The weapon essentially aimed itself. The charges detonated 25 feet above and below the target, creating a crushing pressure wave that did not require a direct hit. The double Squid achieved a confirmed success rate of roughly 40%, 25 times more effective than the depth charge it replaced. Stewart Blacker retired from the Territorial Army in October 1942, before his weapons ever reached their full potential on the battlefield. He moved to Coldhays, a house in Steep Marsh, Hampshire, designed by the architect Alfred Waterhouse and listed as a Grade 2-star heritage building. And there, in his basement workshop, he continued to invent. He never stopped. New projectiles, new fuses, new ideas, tested on the grounds of his estate, just as he had always done. He kept at it until the 19th of April, 1964, when he passed away at the age of 76. He was buried in the churchyard at Steep. There was no public ceremony, no guard of honor, no recognition from the military establishment that had spent a decade telling him his ideas were worthless. For 4 weapon systems that saw active service during the war, the Blacker Bombard, the PIAT, the Hedgehog and the Petard, Spigot mortar mounted on Churchill tanks, he received £25,000 as an interim payment and £7,000 from the Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors in 1957, £32,000 in total. No knighthood, no statue, no film, no public recognition of any kind. £32,000 for weapons that helped turn the Battle of the Atlantic and saw action on every front, from Normandy to the Pacific. His memoirs were finally published by his grandson, Barnaby Blacker, in 2009, 45 years after his passing. The book was called The Adventures and Inventions of Stewart Blacker. It remains the only dedicated account of his life. Millis Jeffries, the man who took Blacker's Spigot mortar and turned it into production weapons, received a knighthood and rose to the rank of Major General. Stuart McCrae, who worked alongside Jeffries, wrote a popular book called Winston Churchill's Toyshop that became the standard account of wartime weapons development. Both men found Blacker, in their own words, a very difficult person. Jeffries, by several accounts, was pleased to see the back of him. Even the credit for the weapons Blacker had conceived became tangled in institutional rivalries and disputed claims at official hearings. Blacker himself described his battle against the military establishment with characteristic bluntness. He wrote that they had created the bombard by strictly underground methods in defiance of an entrenched bureaucracy, the direct descendants, through generations of unmarried mothers, of King Ethelred the Unready. The question of why Blacker was forgotten while other wartime inventors became famous has a straightforward answer. Alan Turing had code-breaking, personal tragedy, and eventually a feature film. Barnes Wallis had The Dam Busters, one of the most iconic raids of the war, and a movie that has never left British popular culture. Robert Watson Watt had radar, the technology that won the Battle of Britain. Each of them could be attached to a single dramatic narrative that the public could understand and remember. Blacker invented a component, a launching principle, that other people then adapted into finished weapons. The Hedgehog was a collaborative development. Blacker provided the Spigot mortar concept, but the naval version was engineered by Goodeve and the DMWD. The Army versions came from Jeffries and MD1. Credit was shared, disputed at official hearings, and eventually diluted until no single name could claim ownership of the result. There was no defining moment, no single raid, no single breakthrough, just a principle that quietly made its way into 4 different weapons and changed the mathematics of anti-submarine warfare without anyone noticing who had started it all. And there is another reason. Blacker retired from service in October 1942. The Hedgehog's greatest impact came after he left. In 1943, 1944, and 1945, the weapon's success rate climbed from 5% to over 35% during years when Blacker was already tinkering quietly in his basement in Hampshire, completely disconnected from the war he had helped to shape. His weapons were also, frankly, unglamorous. The bombard was widely disliked by the Home Guard units that had to operate it. The PIAT was notoriously unpleasant to fire, heavy, awkward, and brutally punishing on the shoulder. These were not romantic icons like the Spitfire or the Lancaster. They were ugly, practical tools that did their job and earned no affection from the men who used them. But his legacy lives on in the weapons themselves. The Russian Navy's RBU 6000 Smerch, 2 anti-submarine rocket launcher, which entered service in 1960 and remains operational to this day aboard dozens of warships, is a direct conceptual descendant of the Hedgehog, the same principle of throwing a pattern of projectiles forward at a submerged target. The Swedish Elma A SW600, developed in the 1980s, was the last weapon of this type to enter production. In Western navies, the forward-throwing principle evolved through the Squid, then the Limbo, which served in Commonwealth navies into the 1980s, before being replaced by homing torpedoes and the ASROC system. Hedgehog launchers and projectiles sit today in the Imperial War Museums in London, the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, and the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. There is no memorial to Stewart Blacker anywhere, the man who proposed the simplest solution of the entire war. Fire forward instead of backward. Fire while you can still see the target instead of after you have gone blind. Passed away in a country cottage with a basement full of unexploded ordnance. He had spent his life fighting 2 wars simultaneously, one against the enemy abroad and one against the bureaucracy that was supposed to be on his side. He won both of them, and nobody remembered his name. His insight seems so obvious now that it is almost difficult to believe it required years of rejection, the personal intervention of a wartime prime minister, and thousands of merchant sailors lost in the freezing Atlantic before anyone finally listened. Stop throwing bombs behind you into the dark. throw them ahead of you into the light. That was it. That was the whole idea, and it changed the war at sea forever.